Rain had a way of magnifying everything, the colors, the smells, the tension in the air. That morning, the droplets streaked across my old sedan like tiny veils, distorting the familiar view of the grocery store I had visited for decades. I parked in my usual corner, tucked near the side entrance where the puddles weren't deep. My hands, slightly trembling, gripped the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary. A grocery run shouldn't feel like stepping into a battlefield. Yet, as soon as I pushed open the door and felt the cool, conditioned air wash over me, a gnawing sense of foreboding settled in my chest. I tried to shake it off. "It's just groceries," I whispered to myself, though the echo of the words felt hollow. I had done this countless times before. Aisle by aisle, familiar labels, familiar faces. But today was different. Something in the air hinted at change, a shift I couldn't yet name. As I wandered toward the produce section, my eyes scanned the bright oranges and the green, crisp lettuce, trying to focus on the mundane task at hand. And then I felt it, a presence. Sharp, cold, impossible to ignore. Someone was standing behind me, and though I hadn't seen her face yet, the weight of her gaze pressed against my back. I turned slowly, and there she was, perfectly poised, perfectly smiling, as though the world had bent itself to accommodate her. Her hair gleamed, brushed to perfection, cascading down her shoulders with effortless elegance. A faint scent, something floral, subtle but invasive, lingered in the air around her. Her eyes met mine, sharp and calculating, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a warning I couldn't ignore. "You must be Margaret," she said, her voice like silk stretched over steel. It was syrupy sweet, but carried an undercurrent of danger. I blinked, unsure if I should be flattered or threatened. "Excuse me?" My tone was cautious, laced with instinctive wariness. "Oh, don't play coy," she said, tilting her head with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know all about you. Everyone does, but don't worry. I'm not here to hurt you. Not yet." Her words landed like tiny knives, precise and deliberate. Not yet? The implications sank deep into my chest. I steadied myself against the edge of the shelf, pretending to inspect a carton of tomatoes. But my hands shook. There was something unnerving about the way she spoke, as though she were declaring a subtle claim over something that wasn't hers. And yet, I knew exactly who she was. My son's new wife. The young, elegant woman I had watched from a distance, smiling in pictures, inserting herself effortlessly into family gatherings. The same woman I had once welcomed with hesitant warmth now radiated calculated audacity. I had heard stories, warnings whispered by older women in the neighborhood, tales of daughters-in-law who tried to overtake a mother's place. I had dismissed them, convinced of my son's decency and my own place in his life. But standing here, faced with her, I realized those stories were not exaggerated. They were preparations, lessons disguised as cautionary tales. "You're my son's wife," I said carefully, testing the waters, trying to gauge whether her charm hid malice or if her intentions were truly transparent. She smiled again, the kind of smile that disarmed strangers but set my nerves on fire. "Yes, and you're very much still in the picture. Too much, some might say. But I'm learning. Slowly, patiently. Things change, you know." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the aisle where the checkout counters glimmered under fluorescent lights, then back to me. I caught a flicker of something darker there, a predator measuring its prey, calculating the first strike in a silent war I hadn't agreed to fight yet. I realized in that moment that this encounter wasn't accidental. She hadn't come to the store by chance. Her steps, her timing, the way she said my name. It was all deliberate. She was testing me, observing me, learning how to unsettle me without overt confrontation. I forced a smile, hoping to mask the rapid thrum of anxiety in my chest. "It's nice to meet you properly," I said, though my voice betrayed the slightest quiver. "Likewise," she said, her lips curving into that perfect icy crescent. You'll find, Margaret, that sometimes the old guard doesn't know when to step aside. But don't worry. I'm gentle. For now. She moved past me, gliding with the confidence of someone who had already won invisible battles. I watched her go, trying to steady my breath, feeling a strange mix of anger and fear. My shopping list blurred in my hands as I grappled with a horrifying thought. She wasn't just another member of the family. She had intentions. She had a plan. And I was suddenly painfully aware that my place, my carefully nurtured, fiercely protected role as the heart of this family, was under threat. I wandered the aisles in a daze, touching jars and cartons, feeling their cold surfaces, grounding myself in reality. But the feeling lingered, haunting. Her words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over, "Not yet." As I loaded my basket, I noticed the subtle ways she had inserted herself into the store. Chatting with the cashier, her laughter a little too precise, a little too rehearsed, commanding attention without seeming to. It was a power move, executed so gracefully that no one around her suspected a thing. Everyone saw charm, warmth, and elegance. I saw strategy. By the time I reached the checkout, my hands were slightly clammy, my chest tight. She was standing a few aisles away, casually scanning items, a perfect picture of innocence to anyone else. But I saw through the illusion. She had already begun to stake her claim, not just in the family, but in the mind of my son, in the rhythm of our home. And then it hit me with the force of a lightning bolt. She wasn't just trying to fit in, she was trying to replace me. Every memory of sacrifices made, of nights spent comforting a child while grieving a husband, of birthdays planned and holidays preserved, surged forward in a wave of anger and sorrow. This woman, with her perfect hair and carefully modulated voice, thought she could erase years of love and labor with a smile and a few well-timed words. I realized then that nothing could prepare me for what was coming. The calm I had carried through life shattered, replaced by a blazing determination. If she thought she could step into my life, into my family, and take my place, she had forgotten one very important thing. I wasn't going anywhere. And as I pushed my cart past her, my eyes briefly meeting hers, cold, calculating, fearless, I knew the first chapter of this war had already begun. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. But inside me, a storm had erupted. A storm that was just beginning. I walked to my car, loaded my groceries, and took a deep breath. My son's wife had made her move, but the battle for my place, for my family, had only just begun. And in that moment, I swore silently to myself. She may have forgotten one thing, but I never would. As I drove home, the image of her eyes burned into my mind. She thinks she can replace me. She doesn't know what I am capable of. The scent of rain lingered in the air as I stepped into my quiet home, my groceries set aside, and my thoughts tumbling like a storm. I leaned against the counter, letting my hands brush over the smooth surface as I tried to steady my racing heart. The encounter at the store wasn't just unnerving. It had unearthed memories I had long buried, ghosts of a life that had demanded everything of me and given nothing back in return. I remembered the first day I had entered this family's world. I had been 23, young and naive, clutching the hands of a man I loved fiercely and blindly. My husband, David, had been the kind of man whose laughter could fill a room, whose embrace could make any sorrow feel distant. But life, as I would soon learn, had a cruel streak, and our happiness had been fleeting. It was the kind of loss that reshapes a person, that leaves cracks in the foundation of your soul. When David passed, unexpectedly and suddenly, I was left with a child barely able to comprehend the void, a home filled with echoes, and a heart that refused to heal. I had promised him, my son, that we would endure, that we would thrive. And I had meant it. Those early days were a blur of sleepless nights, warm bottles, and the quiet terror of wondering if I could ever give my child the life he deserved. without the anchor of the man who had been our world. I worked tirelessly, taking odd jobs, balancing the books, keeping a household running while nursing a heart too raw to even function properly some days. I learned painfully how to be both mother and father, protector and nurturer, disciplinarian and cheerleader. I became the center of a fragile orbit, holding together a life that felt like it could fracture at any moment. And I had done it all with a quiet determination, rarely admitting the exhaustion or the fear that gnawed at me in the dead of night. My friends whispered that I was too young, that I was sacrificing myself, that I would burn out before I could enjoy life. But I didn't care. My son's happiness, his security, his love. These were the things I lived for. I thought I had survived the worst. I thought I had mastered the art of keeping my family intact, of navigating a world that often seemed set on testing me at every turn. And for a long time, it had worked. We were a small, tight-knit unit, resilient and unyielding. My son grew into a young man I was proud of, someone who carried both my strength and David's gentleness. But now, I felt an unfamiliar chill creeping into that carefully constructed sanctuary. My son's wife, with her flawless composure and strategic charm, was attempting to infiltrate the life I had built brick by brick. It wasn't just fear that clawed at my chest. It was anger, raw and consuming. How dare she assume that my place could be vacated so easily? That love, sacrifice, and years of struggle could be replaced with a few polite smiles and rehearsed words. I wandered into the living room, my eyes falling on old photographs that lined the mantelpiece. David's smiling face, my son as a toddler with chubby cheeks and wide eyes, moments frozen in time when life had seemed simpler, purer, more real. I touched the frames gently, my fingers tracing the glass as if seeking to draw strength from these memories. I thought about the nights I had spent comforting my son through nightmares, soothing him after scraped knees, whispered fears, and adolescent heartbreaks. I had been there through every milestone, every ache, every triumph. And now, someone else had the audacity to step into this carefully cultivated space, as though the love and effort I had poured into our lives could be undone in a matter of weeks. The truth hit me harder than I expected. Life had demanded I be everything: mother, father, protector, nurturer, and I had delivered. And yet, in a cruel twist, my very success had made me a target. My son's wife had come prepared, armed with charm, youth, and subtle manipulation, believing that she could eclipse decades of dedication with practiced poise. I sank into the armchair by the window, staring at the rain-soaked garden outside. Memories collided with present fears. I remembered the first school recital my son had performed in, his tiny hands clutching mine as he sang off-key but proudly, his face alight with innocence. I had cheered louder than anyone else, my heart swelling with pride, feeling the purest form of love I had ever known. And I realized that the foundation of what she sought to dismantle wasn't material. It wasn't about furniture or traditions or household routines. It was the emotional architecture of a family, the bonds forged in nights of tears, days of quiet endurance, years of unspoken sacrifice. She could never understand that. She could never replicate what had been built in the crucible of grief, resilience, and love. But even with this clarity, the fear remained. I didn't know what she was capable of, how far she might go, what lengths she would stretch to assert herself in our lives. And that uncertainty gnawed at me, feeding a restless vigilance I couldn't shake. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it absently, but it was only a reminder of the mundane. A grocery list, a call to a friend. Nothing urgent. And yet, I felt the weight of her presence, the memory of her eyes, the soft threat embedded in her words at the store. Not yet. The phrase lingered like smoke, curling into the corners of my mind, refusing to dissipate. I stood up, pacing the living room. I imagined the conversations she might be having with my son when I wasn't looking, the subtle shifts in attention, the calculated kindness that masked ambition. The thought made my chest tighten. How much of my son's world was she already infiltrating? How many moments had I missed while trusting time and love to protect him? And then, a cold certainty settled in my bones. This was a battle I could not ignore. My son's happiness, my family's integrity, the home I had nurtured through grief and tireless effort. They were all at stake. I could not allow her to erode what I had spent a lifetime building. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The past had shaped me. The ghosts of loss, the shadows of grief, the hard-won victories of love and perseverance. They were my armor. And armed with that history, I would face her. How far would she go to take what I had built? The question echoed in the silence, unanswered, but resolute in its warning. I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that the next move would define everything. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the fire of determination spark within me. She had made her move. But she hadn't counted on the past, on the ghosts of my sacrifices, on the depth of my love. I would not step aside. I would not falter. The war had begun. She has no idea how much I've endured, and no one can replace decades of love and sacrifice. But how far will she go to take what I've built? Family gatherings had always been my sanctuary. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners, these were the threads that wove the tapestry of my life. I had once looked forward to them with open arms, eager to fill the house with warmth, laughter, and the faint aroma of home-cooked meals. But now every event felt like walking through a minefield. It began subtly. At my son's 27th birthday, I noticed her first, my daughter-in-law. Sitting across the room, perfectly composed, her posture flawless, eyes flicking casually from guest to guest, scanning, measuring. It wasn't just observation, it was a silent assertion of control. She didn't just attend these events, she occupied them, molding the space, bending it to her design. I tried to remind myself that my son was still there, still mine, but even his presence seemed to shift under her influence. She laughed at his jokes first, leaned in when he spoke, subtly adjusting the flow of conversation so that I found myself on the periphery, listening to laughter that didn't reach my ears. I felt sidelined, like a ghost occupying a space that was supposed to belong to me. And with every polite nod and measured smile I forced, I realized that her gaze haunted me. Those eyes, sharp, calculating, ever-present, seemed to follow me across the room. I could feel the weight of her scrutiny pressing down, and it made my heart race. I sat at the table, picking at my salad, pretending to admire the arrangement of flowers. My son's friends chatted animatedly, and I laughed at the appropriate moments, all the while aware of her subtle manipulations. She would tilt her head toward him as he spoke, letting her voice carry a soft approval that drew his attention. She touched his arm lightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough to mark territory. I felt anger simmer beneath my ribs, an ember threatening to ignite. How dare she? How dare she insinuate herself into our lives, as though decades of love, loss, and sacrifice could be swept aside with a few carefully chosen gestures. Yet alongside the anger, a tremor of fear lingered. She was not overtly cruel, not yet. But there was a precision to her moves, a cunning patience that I found unnerving. After dinner, I found a quiet corner in the living room, hoping to breathe. My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped them around a cup of tea, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I couldn't remember the last time I had felt truly unobserved in my own home. "You're quiet tonight," my son said, sliding into the chair beside me. His voice carried warmth, but even he seemed slightly distracted. My eyes followed the slight glance he cast toward her, the small smile she offered him that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," I said, my tone a fraction too sharp. I knew I had to hide my unease, to mask the fear that bubbled beneath the surface. I had learned long ago that family needed calm, strength, and assurance, not panic and suspicion. But she noticed. Of course she noticed. That was the frightening part. She had an uncanny ability to read people, to identify vulnerabilities and press them gently but relentlessly. Her eyes locked onto mine across the room later that evening, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was a silent challenge, a subtle declaration that this battle was ongoing. I spent the night replaying the moments in my head, the way she leaned in when my son spoke, the fleeting touch on his arm, the tiny, almost imperceptible corrections she made in conversation. Each gesture seemed designed to assert dominance, to claim space I had held for years. As the evening wound down, I excused myself, retreating to the kitchen to wash my hands, needing the cold water to steady my nerves. The sound of her laughter floated in from the living room, light and melodic, yet there was an edge to it that made my stomach twist. She was everywhere and nowhere, omnipresent in my mind even when I couldn't see her. Later, lying awake in my bedroom, the events replayed like a film on a loop. Her eyes haunted me most of all. Sharp, calculating, unblinking, watching, marking territory. Even in dreams they followed me, glinting with subtle malice, a reminder that my family, my home, the life I had painstakingly built, was under silent siege. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps I was imagining her intentions, twisting her actions through the lens of my insecurities. But deep down, a quiet, insistent voice whispered that I was not exaggerating. My instincts rarely misled me, especially when it came to protecting those I loved. I remembered my early years of widowhood, when fear had been a constant companion. I had faced sleepless nights, the terror of raising a child alone, navigating a world that seemed intent on reminding me of my vulnerabilities. And yet, I had survived. I had endured. I had learned to fight in ways both subtle and relentless. And now, I realized, I would have to fight again. Not against the world at large, but against a presence that sought to undermine everything I had built in silence and love. She didn't just want acceptance. She wanted to replace me. She wanted control, and she was willing to maneuver carefully, invisibly, to achieve it. I knew then that patience would be my ally, observation my weapon. I would watch her, study her, trace the faint patterns of manipulation she left behind, and counter them with precision. I could not allow my emotions to betray me. I could not give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Yet, despite my resolve, I could not shake the image of her eyes. Ever present, unyielding, haunting, they were a silent declaration of intent, a constant reminder that the battle had begun. I had fought wars before, faced grief and loss with quiet fortitude. But this was personal. This was intimate. This was my family, my home, my place in the life I had spent decades nurturing. And in the depth of my mind, a question lingered, sharp as a knife. How far would she go to take what I had built? I could sense her presence even now, not physically, but as a shadow over every corner of my consciousness. Every laugh my son offered, every conversation he held, every family ritual we once shared, it was subtly, imperceptibly, being infiltrated. And she knew it. She could feel it. And that, more than anything, unsettled me. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind against the window seemed magnified. I could feel her eyes on me still, invisible but undeniable. The realization settled like cold stone in my chest. This was no longer a simple intrusion. This was a war. And she had already marked the battlefield with her gaze. I drew the covers tight around me, my mind racing. Tomorrow I would face her again, at another family gathering, another carefully orchestrated encounter. And I would be ready. I had to be. Because she had forgotten one thing. I had survived loss, grief, and loneliness. I had raised a child alone and nurtured a family through storms of every kind. I had endured, persisted, and loved fiercely. And that strength, that history, was something she could never take from me. As I closed my eyes, the last thought lingering before sleep finally claimed me was simple and resolute. She may think she owns this space, this family, this life, but she is wrong. And I would prove it. Even now, I could feel her watching, claiming every corner of my family with her eyes. How far will she go to take what I've built? And will I be ready when she strikes next? The morning after that restless night, I awoke with a single, undeniable thought. I could no longer wait for the inevitable to happen. The signs were too clear, the danger too present. My son's wife was no ordinary intruder into our lives. She was methodical, strategic, and patient. And if I wanted to protect my family, I had to understand her completely. I began my investigation subtly, carefully. First, I observed her patterns. I noted the way she interacted with our neighbors, the timing of her visits, the people she sought out. Everything was deliberate, choreographed, as if she were performing in a play she had written herself. She smiled in just the right way, laughed in just the right places, and always positioned herself close to my son without making it obvious. Every interaction carried a faint undertone, a quiet message of possession, but observation alone would not suffice. I needed knowledge. I needed the hidden layers, the motives that she had so cleverly masked behind charm and perfection. My first step was social media, a tool she underestimated, a place where even the most careful facade leaves traces. Her profiles were curated meticulously, yet patterns began to emerge. Photos of her previous jobs, her carefully chosen friends, posts that suggested a life of privilege and meticulous planning, a vacation with a family she never mentioned, a friendship that ended abruptly and bitterly. Subtle hints of relationships that didn't last, yet left traces in the corners of her digital presence. Every click, every image, every interaction added another layer to the mosaic I was slowly piecing together. The deeper I dug, the more contradictions I found. She spoke of humility and family values, yet her history hinted at manipulation and ambition that overrode personal loyalty. A former roommate's posts spoke vaguely of betrayal, of broken promises, of someone who would smile while plotting her next move. Each revelation sent a shiver through me, both chilling and clarifying. I realized that this wasn't just a battle of charm or social grace. It was a war of strategy. She had navigated previous relationships with precision, leaving a trail of subtly broken bonds behind her. And now, our family was her next target. I kept a notebook, scribbling notes about her routines, her quirks, the small details that could later become leverage. The tilt of her head when she lied, the way she softened her voice when she wanted sympathy, the fleeting flashes of irritation she tried to hide behind smiles. Every tiny imperfection was a thread I could pull. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I also had to protect my son, to shield him from influence he might not yet recognize. I began planting subtle questions in conversation, testing his awareness of her maneuvers. How did he feel about certain events? Had she suggested changes in our family traditions? Did he feel a shift in his role, his influence, or his attention? He answered honestly, though unconsciously, revealing that he too had noticed the subtle manipulations, even if he hadn't fully confronted them. Every piece of information deepened the emotional tension. I began to understand her motives more clearly. She craved not just acceptance, but dominance, control over the rhythm of our home, over the emotional architecture that had taken decades to build. Her plan was precise, her strategy subtle, her methods almost invisible, and she believed she could execute them without consequence. I found myself replaying past events in a new light. The way she had seated herself beside my son at family dinners, the careful corrections in conversation, the soft encouragements that guided his attention toward her. None of it had been accidental. Every gesture had been calculated, a thread in a tapestry she was weaving to replace me. The knowledge ignited a fire within me. I could no longer wait. Patience was necessary, yes, but I had to act preemptively to safeguard the foundation I had painstakingly constructed. Every day I delayed increased the risk of her success. Every overlooked detail was a vulnerability I could not afford. I began to strategize. I planned subtle countermoves, ways to assert my presence without appearing aggressive, ways to remind my son of the years of care, sacrifice, and love that formed the backbone of our family. I would not confront her openly. She thrived on the dramatic. But I would create moments where her ambitions would meet resistance, where her plans would falter under the weight of history and loyalty. The more I learned about her past, the more I realized how dangerous she truly was. She was not merely ambitious, she was adaptive, cunning, and fearless. Her social media traces revealed a pattern of charming her way into families, friendships, and professional circles, leaving disruption in her wake. And now she had underestimated me. She had assumed that my place could be filled easily, that my vigilance could be softened by time and trust. But she had forgotten one crucial fact. Decades of love, sacrifice, and resilience could not be erased by charm or subtlety. My family was not just a collection of relationships, it was the product of survival, endurance, and unwavering commitment. She could try to imitate, manipulate, or infiltrate, but she could never replace the emotional foundation I had built. As evening descended, I found myself reviewing the evidence, cross-referencing events, and imagining the potential outcomes of her next moves. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Each discovery brought clarity, but also a sense of urgency. I realized that knowledge without action was useless. Observation without intervention would allow her influence to grow, subtly but irreversibly. I envisioned a timeline of her potential maneuvers. The quiet moments when she would attempt to sway my son, the carefully timed gestures of attention, the social interactions designed to isolate me from the emotional center of our home. Every scenario required a calculated response. Every possibility demanded preparation. The night grew late, and I finally sat back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. I understood now that this was no longer about subtle discomfort or polite rivalry. This was a calculated attempt to rewrite the emotional landscape of my family, to displace me in the life I had nurtured with sweat, tears, and unyielding love. And that realization crystallized a single, urgent thought in my mind. I must act before she strikes. The weight of that truth settled heavily on my shoulders. I had known challenges before, faced adversity that tested every fiber of my being, and endured. But this was different. This was intimate, personal, and strategic. And yet, despite the fear, the uncertainty, and the enormity of what lay ahead, I felt a spark of clarity. I could protect my family. I could reclaim the spaces she sought to dominate. I could withstand her ambition and cunning. I rose from my chair, a sense of purpose solidifying within me. The battle had shifted. Observation and investigation had revealed her intentions, and now it was time for measured action. Every detail mattered. Every nuance could tip the scales. And as I stared at the quiet street outside my window, rain still clinging to the leaves and pavement, I whispered to myself, a vow stronger than fear or anger. She may be clever, she may be strategic, but I will not let her take what I have built. The next steps would define everything, and I would be ready. I know her motives now. I see the cracks in her carefully curated facade, and I must act before she strikes. The next family gathering arrived like an uninvited storm, subtle yet unavoidable. I could feel her presence even before stepping through the front door. The moment I saw her, poised with a perfected smile and a careful tilt of the head, I understood one thing. She had noticed me noticing her. That sharp flicker in her eyes betrayed awareness. And yet, I could almost hear the unspoken thought hovering in the air between us. She has no idea I know. I reminded myself to breathe, to anchor myself in patience. Overt confrontation would only play into her hands. She thrived on the visible, the dramatic, the moments that allowed her charm to disarm and manipulate. My weapon was subtlety, precision, and observation. I began laying small, almost imperceptible markers. A lingering question here, a casual comment there, each carefully designed to probe her reactions and test her intentions. When she laughed too brightly at a remark my son made, I leaned closer and said softly, "Don't you think he's being a bit dramatic?" The slight frown that crossed her face was fleeting, yet it spoke volumes. She noticed the challenge, the subtle reminder that I was still present, still influential. During dinner, I left other small traces. A book subtly placed on the coffee table, a recipe I knew she admired but had no real understanding of, memories I casually mentioned, highlighting decades of shared experiences that she could never replicate. I watched her shift slightly, those practiced movements faltering for a brief instant, revealing the smallest crack in her polished veneer. It was a delicate game of cat and mouse, mental chess played with words, gestures, and the weight of presence. Every move had to be measured, every reaction observed. If I misstepped, the advantage could tip in her favor. And yet, for the first time, I felt a quiet thrill in the tension, a reminder of why I had survived all the storms before this one. I noticed how she tried to control conversations, redirecting topics, subtly drawing attention toward her. She would interject softly, smile just right, and yet, in those microseconds between words, I could see her calculating the impact, the influence over my son, over the room. It was almost artistic, in a terrifying way. But the artistry had limits. She was clever, yes, but she underestimated me. After the gathering, I retreated to my quiet corner, a notebook in hand, and began to map out the patterns I had observed. Each interaction, each gesture, each fleeting expression was a puzzle piece. And slowly, a pattern emerged. She sought dominance not through overt conflict, but through subtle redirection, emotional nudges, and unassuming charm. She didn't want confrontation. She wanted to replace me without anyone noticing the switch. I realized then that my role was twofold. I had to protect the emotional integrity of my family and expose the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. And to do that, I needed to escalate my subtle tactics. I began planting tiny seeds of doubt, indirect questions and remarks aimed to reveal inconsistencies in her narratives. "Didn't you once mention your cousin had a bakery?" I asked casually one evening. Her eyes flickered, a fraction too quickly, a slight hesitation before she smiled. The smallest slip, but enough to confirm my suspicions. Her past contained truths she wished to conceal. Another night, I shared a story about my son's childhood, a story she had never witnessed, a memory only a mother could possess. I watched her posture, the way she adjusted her necklace, the micro-expression of realization that some histories were beyond her reach. She tried to recover with a polite laugh, but it was slightly strained, almost fragile. I had drawn her into a corner of memory she could not dominate, exposing the limits of her subtle power. The psychological battle unfolded in silence as much as in words. Every smile, every gesture, every conversation became a test. I observed her, anticipating her strategies, readying countermoves in my mind. I realized that she thrived on uncertainty, on the invisible tug-of-war, the unspoken dynamics of control. And I began to turn that uncertainty against her, making her hesitate, falter, reveal small but critical truths. There were moments, fleeting and almost imperceptible, when her confidence wavered. A glance exchanged with my son that lingered a moment too long. A slight stiffening of posture. A carefully masked irritation. Each was a victory, subtle and quiet, but a victory nonetheless. And I documented them meticulously, preparing for the days when the patterns would become undeniable, when the subtlety would crystallize into clarity. I also strengthened my presence, At family dinners, I took small, deliberate actions to assert my role without aggression. Placing an arm around my son as he shared a joke, recounting shared memories with warmth, letting my laughter fill the spaces she attempted to dominate. The reactions were almost imperceptible to anyone else, but they were not lost on her. I could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the momentary doubt, the awareness that I was still very much here, still influential, still unshaken. And yet, I couldn't ignore the emotional weight of the ongoing battle. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, tempered by fear, frustration, and a keen awareness of the stakes. My family's emotional foundation was at risk. Every slip, every hesitation, could give her an opening. But the fire in me refused to dim. I had survived loss, grief, and isolation before. I could endure this too. By the end of that week, I sensed a shift. She had noticed the subtle counters, the markers I had left, the probes I had orchestrated. The tension in the air was tangible, almost electric. She was alert, aware that her dominance was being challenged. But she had underestimated one thing: my endurance, my patience, my capacity for vigilance honed over decades. The final sign came during a quiet evening when she reached for a family album on the shelf, only to find it moved slightly, a note tucked inside a page she would never notice at first glance. I had left a subtle trace, a reminder of the depth of my history, of memories she could not claim, of experiences she could never replicate. I saw her pause, eyes narrowing briefly, just a fraction too long, before she continued her search elsewhere. That pause, however small, told me everything. She had noticed, and yet it was too late. I had already begun to set the boundaries, establish the invisible markers of my presence, and reclaim the influence she sought to usurp. I leaned back in my chair that night, exhausted, yet resolute. The mental game had begun, and the psychological battlefield was set. Each move she made could be anticipated, each gesture countered, each subtle manipulation exposed. The tension hung heavy, but it was a tension I welcomed. It meant I was still in control, still vigilant, still capable of protecting what was mine. The war would continue, quiet but relentless, played out in glances, gestures, and whispered words. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had made her move, but she had not yet won. She has noticed my counters, the traces I've left, the subtle markers of my presence, but it is too late. I am ready. And when she strikes again, she will face a force she never anticipated. It began with a silence that was deafening. One morning, I realized she was gone. My son's wife, always so present, so poised, so meticulously in control, was nowhere to be found. No calls, no messages, no sudden errands, just an empty space where her carefully constructed presence had once been. At first, I felt relief, a strange lightness in my chest, almost guilty in its intensity. But relief quickly gave way to unease. Her disappearance was not quiet or accidental. There were no signs of packing, no mention of visiting relatives. Everything had been left behind. Her perfume lingering faintly in the living room, her half-finished tea on the counter, the subtle chaos of a life abruptly paused. My mind raced. Was she testing me again? Or had her plan faltered? Part of me wanted to hope it was the latter, that she had overreached and was now forced to retreat. But another, more insistent part whispered that the absence was strategic, calculated. She had left something behind, a trace meant to unsettle, to provoke. I began my own investigation immediately, diving into her past with renewed urgency. What had I missed? What secrets had she brought into our lives, hidden behind charm and calculated smiles? The deeper I dug, the more unsettling the picture became. I discovered inconsistencies in the stories she had casually shared. A career she claimed to have abandoned years ago didn't match employment records. Friends she had mentioned seemed unaware of her existence at certain points in her life. A brief stint abroad, glossed over as travel, revealed a pattern of leaving situations abruptly, always with appearances intact, but relationships quietly fractured. Each revelation tightened the knot of anger and vindication in my chest. This was no ordinary woman. She was practiced in manipulation, an artist of appearances, and I had seen the edges of her craft before, but I had underestimated the depth of her cunning. Emails, messages, even subtle interactions she had left behind became pieces of the puzzle. I traced her connections, her networks, her former acquaintances who whispered half-truths about charm, betrayal, and ambition. It became increasingly clear that her disappearance wasn't a retreat. It was a pause, a strategic repositioning. She had left so suddenly not because she feared confrontation, but because she believed she could return under new conditions, reclaiming advantage with even greater subtlety. The emotional intensity of the realization hit me like a storm. Fear, because she was unpredictable, and unpredictability is dangerous. Anger, because she had dared to infiltrate, to manipulate, to threaten the life I had built. Vindication, because every instinct I had followed, every subtle probe, every psychological countermove had revealed the truth. She was not the person she presented herself to be. I confronted my son quietly that evening, sitting across from him with a calm I did not fully feel. "Have you noticed anything strange about her?" I asked, watching his expression carefully. He hesitated, then nodded, acknowledging small inconsistencies, subtle manipulations, moments that had seemed minor at the time, but now painted a broader picture. "She's gone for a few days," he said, uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe she just needed space." I looked him in the eye, letting the weight of my knowledge settle between us. "It's more than that. You've seen it too, haven't you? The little things that didn't make sense?" He swallowed, reluctant, but honest. "Yes, I've noticed, but I didn't want to believe it." That moment crystallized the tension I had carried for months. She had believed she could orchestrate her presence without detection. She had underestimated the vigilance of a mother, the subtlety of decades of experience in observation, protection, and love. And now, her absence confirmed one critical truth. She had misjudged me. I returned to her room, the space she had occupied with meticulous care. The sight of it, pristine yet frozen in time, spoke volumes. The faint traces of her habits, the carefully curated items, the subtle signs of control she had tried to maintain. Everything now felt like a confession. Her presence lingered like a shadow, but the reality of her disappearance was undeniable. In that quiet moment, I realized how much she had underestimated me. Every subtle test I had orchestrated, every psychological maneuver, every observation had created a framework she could not break. Her tactics, honed over years in other environments, had failed because she had not accounted for the depth of my resilience, my vigilance, my instinctive understanding of human behavior when love and family are at stake. The revelation brought a complex mixture of emotions. Fear remained, she was clever, and her plans were far from fully revealed. Anger burned. How dare she try to claim what was not hers, to manipulate my son, and destabilize the family I had built through grief and sacrifice. And yet, a sharp thread of satisfaction wound through it all, a recognition of my own power, subtle yet undeniable. I began tracing her digital footprint with greater focus. Old messages, emails, social media interactions. They formed a hidden history of ambition, manipulation, and sudden departures. She had a pattern, and the pattern revealed intent. She didn't just vanish. She left deliberate spaces, gaps that could be exploited, moments that would show her true nature to anyone willing to look closely. As I mapped out her history, I felt a strange surge of determination. Every disappearance, every pause, every subtle manipulation would be countered, anticipated, and neutralized. I understood now that knowledge was power, and with knowledge came control. She had believed she could replace me with ease. She had believed that my vigilance could be softened by trust, by love, by the natural rhythms of family life. But she had miscalculated. She had failed to recognize the depth of my connection, the strength of my endurance, and the precision of my attention. By evening, I had pieced together a timeline of her previous disappearances and movements. Patterns emerged: sudden exits, strategic pauses, subtle shifts in social circles, and carefully orchestrated interactions designed to assert influence. And in that web of information, one truth became irrefutable. She was clever, but she was predictable. And predictability in my hands was a weapon. I called my son again, this time not to question him, but to anchor him in the reality I had uncovered. I reminded him of the truths we both knew, the inconsistencies we had observed, the small, telling actions that revealed her intent. His eyes widened as he absorbed the connections I had drawn, his initial skepticism replaced by concern. "She underestimated you," he said quietly, finally acknowledging the truth. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "And that was her first mistake." The emotional intensity of the moment was almost overwhelming. Fear for the unknown, anger at the audacity of her schemes, and vindication in the certainty that I had seen her plans unfold before she even knew I understood them. And then it struck me, starkly and with dramatic clarity. She had vanished not to escape, but because she knew I was watching, observing, anticipating. She had underestimated the vigilance born of grief, of resilience, of years spent protecting the family she now sought to disrupt. A sense of both relief and resolve washed over me. Relief, because her absence gave me space to fortify what she had threatened. Resolve, because the game was far from over. She had misjudged me, yes, but her next move would be critical, and I would be ready. For the first time, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. She had underestimated me, and that miscalculation, I knew, would cost her dearly. She thought she could vanish and regroup unnoticed, but she misjudged my vigilance. She has no idea what I've uncovered or what I am capable of. It was a crisp evening when I finally agreed to meet her. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet street outside. I had insisted on a neutral place, a small cafe I frequented, where we could sit and speak without witnesses, without the subtle advantages she might exploit at home. When she arrived, I noticed immediately how she carried herself, still poised, still perfectly controlled. But there was a tension now, subtle and almost imperceptible, that hadn't been there before. The confidence in her eyes flickered briefly as she realized she was stepping into territory she no longer fully controlled. I didn't offer a smile. I didn't soften my gaze. I simply nodded, gesturing toward the empty chair across from me. She sat, smoothing her skirt, hands clasped together, as though the very act of sitting could restore her composure. "Margaret," she began, her tone measured, polite, but I could hear the underlying wariness. I didn't mean to upset anyone." "Upset?" I echoed, voice calm but sharp. "Do you know what it feels like to have someone silently dismantle the life you've built? To infiltrate, manipulate, and assume control without a single word of honesty?" Her eyes flickered, the briefest hesitation. I thought I was helping," she said softly, but the attempt at innocence fell flat. I leaned forward slightly, letting the weight of my presence press against the space between us. "Helping?" I asked, voice rising just enough to carry a cutting edge. "You call undermining, twisting conversations, inserting yourself into my son's life, helping?" She blinked rapidly, a gesture too small to notice if one weren't paying close attention, but I was. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the subtle cracks that revealed intent, truth, hidden behind charm. I didn't realize," she began, but I cut her off. "You didn't realize," I repeated, the words precise, deliberate. "Do you think charm erases years of love, grief, and sacrifice? Do you believe you can rewrite the bonds built through decades with a few rehearsed smiles? Her composure faltered, just slightly, and I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. It was a pause pregnant with meaning, and she knew it. I could see her calculating, considering, but the advantage had shifted. The knowledge, the vigilance, the subtle mastery of observation. It was all mine. "You've underestimated me," I said softly, almost gently, letting the words sink. "And that is the mistake that brought you here. You think influence can replace love, manipulation can replace trust, and ambition can replace loyalty. But you're wrong." Her hands trembled imperceptibly, though she tried to hide it behind a casual fold of her arms. I didn't mean—" "Enough," I said firmly. "No more excuses. You have tested boundaries, and now you know they will not be crossed. You thought you could slip in unnoticed, quietly, cleverly, but you left traces, and I followed every one of them." Her eyes widened, the first real crack in her mask. For a moment, the perfect composure faltered entirely. You've been watching me?" she whispered, disbelief threading her tone. "Of course I have," I said, meeting her gaze evenly. "I had to. Because this is my family, my son, my life, and I will not let it be undermined." The tension between us was almost unbearable. I could see her thinking, calculating her next words, her next move. But I had anticipated them. Every subtle tactic she might employ, every psychological maneuver she could attempt, had already been accounted for in the quiet battles of observation and counteraction I had fought for months. I didn't realize it was this serious," she said finally, voice low, almost pleading. I just wanted—" "You wanted what?" I asked, voice steady, controlled. "To replace me? To rewrite history? To steal what decades of love and sacrifice cannot be taken?" Her gaze faltered. She swallowed hard, a single bead of sweat glistening at her temple. I thought I could— I didn't know you'd notice. And now you do," I said softly, letting the weight of truth hang between us. "And that changes everything." She looked down at her hands, twisting them together nervously, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability, fear. Not the fear of punishment, but the fear of exposure, of having the carefully constructed image crumble under the quiet, persistent weight of truth. I took a slow breath, the emotional intensity crashing over me like waves I had fought to contain. Anger, fear, vindication, love, all mingled in the space between us. And then, in that fragile moment of tension, I realized something profound. This confrontation, this meeting, was more than a battle of strategy. It was a catharsis. It was a recognition of my power, my resilience, my unyielding commitment to my family. I've fought for this family through grief, through nights that seemed endless, through fear and heartbreak, I said, voice softening but firm. Every moment of my life has been a testament to love, sacrifice, and endurance. You cannot replace that. You cannot rewrite it. And you cannot take it. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her eyes, wide and unguarded now, were a mirror of the realization settling over her. For the first time, she understood that charm, manipulation, and ambition were no match for the depth of love and experience that had shaped me. We sat in silence, the emotional storm between us slowly dissipating, leaving only clarity. She had come seeking control, seeking to unsettle, seeking to claim a space that was never hers to take. And she had learned, finally, that influence built on manipulation is fragile, easily exposed by the quiet persistence of truth. When she finally rose to leave, her steps were measured, slow, deliberate. She paused at the door, her eyes meeting mine one last time. There was a flicker of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect, and an unspoken understanding that the battle had shifted irrevocably. "You've changed everything," she said softly, a trace of defeat in her tone. "No," I replied, voice steady. "You've realized it." And then she was gone, leaving behind the echo of her presence, the faint scent of perfume, and the undeniable truth that she had underestimated me. I sat for a long moment, letting the emotional intensity settle, allowing the relief, the catharsis, and the fierce sense of protection for my family to wash over me. The confrontation had not been about victory or defeat in the conventional sense. It had been about recognition, about boundaries, about the irreplaceable depth of love and sacrifice. And in that quiet understanding, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. I had faced her, challenged her, exposed the limits of her influence, and asserted the truth of my presence. She had left, defeated, but alive, an acknowledgement of her miscalculation, a testament to the strength that comes from enduring and loving without compromise. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe fully, deeply, as though a weight I had carried for too long had finally been lifted. And yet, in the back of my mind, I knew this was not the end. The memory of her eyes, the lessons learned, and the vigilance required would remain. But I was ready, stronger than ever, grounded in the certainty of my love, my purpose, and my unyielding presence in my family's life. She leaves, defeated but alive. And though the battle seems paused, the memory of her gaze lingers, and so does the certainty that I am prepared for whatever comes next. In the days following the confrontation, the household felt lighter, yet charged with unspoken tension. My son had grown quieter, introspective, almost hesitant, as though testing the waters of his own realization. He moved through our home with a new awareness, occasionally catching my eye with a subtle, grateful smile that said more than words ever could. He was silently resisting, understanding now that the attempts to sway him had been deliberate, carefully orchestrated, and that the woman he had married, or tried to marry into our lives, had underestimated both of us. I watched him from across the room as he lingered by the window staring at the fading sunlight, and I realized something profound. He was finally starting to reclaim his place in the family's emotional center, a place I had feared slipping away. And with him, the others, the children of past gatherings, the bonds we had forged over years of shared experiences, were quietly aligning. The younger ones, my grandchildren, had always possessed a subtle wisdom beyond their years. They observed more than they spoke, noticing the shifts in attention, the unspoken tension, the delicate games adults played. And in those quiet observations, they had begun their own form of resistance. I discovered it one afternoon, in a living room cluttered with the remnants of school projects, when my youngest whispered almost shyly, "Grandma, we don't like when she tries to change things." I froze for a moment, my heart swelling with a mixture of pride and tenderness. "What do you mean?" I asked softly, crouching to their level. She wanted things different," they said, voice low, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "We know you're the real one who keeps us together." The simplicity and honesty of their words hit me harder than anything I had faced with her. My love, my sacrifices, my constant vigilance, it had never been invisible. They had noticed, even in the way I carried myself silently through their lives, protecting, nurturing, teaching, and defending. And now, in their own quiet way, they were allies in the unspoken battle. I hugged them close, feeling a renewed strength surge through me. The realization settled. Our bond, forged over years of shared laughter, tears, and tender moments, was unbreakable. No outsider, no manipulation, no subtle charm could disrupt what we had cultivated with love. That evening, my son and I shared a quiet conversation in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint aroma of brewing tea forming a cocoon around us. He spoke of his own observations, the subtle pressures he had felt, the nudges toward decisions that did not come from his heart. "I didn't realize how much she was steering me, he confessed, voice heavy with introspection. I felt conflicted, but I didn't understand why. You've learned, I said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. And that awareness is your power. You were never lost. You were guided, softly, by her ambition. But now you know, and knowing changes everything. He nodded, a quiet determination settling in his expression. We'll handle this. Together, he said. And in those words, I felt a profound shift. The family was no longer vulnerable to subtle manipulations. The emotional fortress I had built was reinforced, strengthened by understanding and shared vigilance. Over the next few days, I observed the children with a newfound clarity. They weren't just passive observers, they had begun to play their own roles in safeguarding our home. Subtle hints, gentle reminders, questions that reinforced family traditions. They were quietly asserting the bonds we had nurtured. I realized, with a mixture of awe and relief, that they had absorbed the lessons of love, loyalty, and vigilance far more deeply than I had imagined. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the sunlit living room, my eldest grandchild approached with a small notebook, their eyes bright with quiet pride. "Grandma, we've been keeping track," they said, "of all the things she tried to change. We didn't tell anyone because we wanted to be sure. But now we know you know too." I took the notebook from their hands, flipping through pages filled with observations, notes, and sketches. Every detail of her subtle maneuvers had been recorded. Which conversations she tried to redirect, the ways she positioned herself, the subtle attempts to alter routines, the clarity, the thoroughness, the quiet dedication. It was astonishing. And most importantly, it revealed an understanding I hadn't expected. The children were allies, guardians of our emotional world in their own subtle, intelligent ways. A surge of emotion overtook me. Pride, love, and a fierce protective instinct. These were the invisible threads that bound our family together, stronger than any manipulation, impervious to any charm or cunning. And in that moment, I understood fully that the battle we had fought, silently, strategically, with vigilance and patience, was no longer mine alone. The children had claimed their roles as keepers of our family's integrity. That night, as we gathered around the dinner table, the sense of unity was palpable. Laughter flowed more freely, conversations unfolded naturally, and the subtle echoes of past tensions seemed to fade in the warmth of our collective presence. My son caught my eye across the table, and we shared a quiet, knowing glance. He understood, as did the children, the depth of what had been protected, the vigilance that had been required, and the love that had endured every test. Yet, even in this moment of emotional strength, I knew the shadows of the past lingered. The daughter-in-law's presence, though absent, had left a mark, a reminder of what could be threatened if vigilance faltered. But now, fortified by shared understanding, by observation, and by the unspoken alliances we had forged, the family felt resilient, unified, and ready. As the evening drew to a close, I tucked the children into bed, their whispers of reassurance filling the rooms with warmth. My son and I lingered in the hallway, the quiet settling around us like a protective cloak. He spoke softly, almost in awe. "Together, we were stronger than she imagined," he said, and I nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within me. The battles had not ended, nor had the tension fully dissipated. But in this shared understanding, in this alliance of love, vigilance, and insight, I felt a renewed strength. We were no longer passive participants in the subtle games of manipulation. We were a united force, resilient, aware, and prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And in that quiet, charged space, I allowed myself to feel a profound sense of hope. The children's secret, their silent resistance, was a testament to the depth of love and vigilance that had guided our family through storms before and would continue to guide us in the future. The daughter-in-law may have thought she could infiltrate, manipulate, and claim our home. She may have believed that charm and subtlety were sufficient weapons to sway hearts and shift loyalties. But she had miscalculated, not just me, but the family itself, the invisible strength woven through decades of love, sacrifice, and shared experience. As I turned off the lights and closed the door to the children's rooms, the quiet enveloped the house, comforting yet full of promise. I knew we were ready for whatever came next. We had been tested, and in our unity, we had found an unbreakable strength. Together, we were stronger than she imagined. And the family that she tried to manipulate would not only endure, but thrive, vigilant and unyielding, no matter what came next. The days after the children's quiet revelation were calmer, though the tension never fully disappeared. Our home was filled with the normal rhythms of life, breakfast conversations, laughter spilling over from homework sessions, and the steady hum of evening routines. Yet beneath it all, I could feel the lingering shadow of her presence, the daughter-in-law who had tried to infiltrate our lives, to unsettle the delicate bonds we had nurtured for decades. I found myself reflecting more often, not on her schemes, but on the choices that lay before her now. She had vanished, returned, and vanished again, leaving behind traces of intent, manipulation, and ambition. Yet, I wondered, did she understand what she had attempted to disrupt? Did she see, truly see, the depth of love, endurance, and connection that bound our family together? It was a quiet afternoon when the answer began to unfold. I was in the living room, sorting through old photographs, memories of birthdays, graduations, and family vacations, when my son approached, a hesitant expression on his face. "Mom," he said softly, She reached out today." I looked up, heart tightening. "Reaching out?" "Yes." He nodded. "A message. She said she wanted to talk. Not to come back, not to interfere, but to understand. I think she realizes now what she tried to challenge." I took a deep breath, feeling the complex swirl of emotions rising in me. Anger, relief, suspicion, and, unexpectedly, a faint twinge of empathy. Here was a woman who had acted from ambition, perhaps fear, perhaps ignorance, but who was beginning to glimpse the magnitude of what she had confronted. We agreed to meet again, cautiously, in a neutral space. This time, it was a small park near the edge of town, where the rustle of leaves and distant laughter of children provided a calm backdrop. She arrived alone, her posture slightly less rigid, the careful polish of her previous encounters softened by the subtle weight of humility, or perhaps regret. "Margaret," she began, her voice tentative, almost fragile. I wanted to understand, to see what I tried to disrupt." I studied her silently, noting the absence of the confident armor she had worn in our first confrontation. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held a flicker of vulnerability, a recognition that some forces cannot be swayed by charm or manipulation. "Do you?" I asked softly, keeping my tone even, deliberate. "Do you understand the depth of what you tried to interfere with?" She nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "I think I do. I didn't see it before. I thought influence could replace love, planning could replace sacrifice, and ambition could replace connection. I was wrong." Her admission, simple as it was, carried an unexpected weight. For a brief moment, I considered the choice before me. To hold her accountable with the force of indignation I had felt for months, or to extend a measure of understanding, tempered by the knowledge of endurance and the power of love. I spoke, carefully, choosing my words with the precision honed by months of vigilance. "You underestimated what binds a family together. Love, history, sacrifice, and shared experience. These are not easily swayed. Influence cannot replace them, charm cannot dismantle them, and subtlety cannot overpower what has been built through decades of devotion." She nodded, and for the first time, there was no defensiveness, no subtle challenge, She was beginning to comprehend that some forces, emotional, familial, enduring, cannot be manipulated without consequence. I see that now, she whispered. And I regret what I tried to do. I thought I could belong, but I see now that I was trying to replace, not join. I wanted control where it was never mine to claim. Her words struck me with a curious mix of relief and sorrow. The path to understanding was narrow and steep, yet she was taking steps along it, however faltering. I realized then that redemption is not about absolution. It is about recognition, acknowledgement, and the willingness to confront one's mistakes with honesty. Redemption is not granted by words alone, I said softly, but by understanding, humility, and change. You cannot undo what you tried to disrupt, but you can choose how you move forward. And perhaps, in that choice, there is a lesson for both of us. She looked up, eyes glistening, the first hint of tears threatening to spill. I want to learn that lesson, she admitted, voice trembling. I don't want to cause harm anymore. I see now what I was blind to. I felt a quiet swell of emotion, compassion, tempered by the lingering awareness of her past actions. There was still vigilance to maintain, boundaries to uphold, but I also recognized the potential for growth, for awareness, and for the reclamation of integrity. You must understand, though, I said firmly, that understanding comes with responsibility. You cannot step into a family member's life and attempt to claim it without acknowledging the history, the bonds, and the love that preceded you. That is the price of awareness, the realization that some things cannot be taken lightly, nor ever replaced. She nodded, her expression sober, and for a long moment, we simply sat together on the park bench, listening to the distant laughter of children and the rustling of leaves. The world moved around us, ordinary and indifferent. Yet this moment carried extraordinary weight, the subtle culmination of months of tension, vigilance, and quiet psychological strategy. I realized as I watched her struggle to process the depth of her actions that she had glimpsed a truth she could neither manipulate nor charm away. The enduring bond between a mother and her family is not a fragile thing. It is a force shaped by years of sacrifice, nurtured through trials and triumphs alike, and strengthened by shared resilience. And in that realization, I saw the beginnings of her own reckoning, the first true recognition of the consequences of ambition unchecked by love, of influence sought without understanding, of charm wielded without conscience. As she stood to leave, she hesitated, glancing back with a faint tentative smile. I see now, she said softly. I understand what I tried to challenge, and what I cannot undo. You do, I replied gently, letting the words settle. And that understanding is the beginning of everything you need to learn. She walked away, slower this time, the weight of recognition heavy in her steps. And I felt a quiet satisfaction, not vindictive but profound, a sense that the balance had been restored, that the family bond I had nurtured and defended had endured, and that the lessons of love, vigilance, and integrity had been witnessed even by the one who had sought to undermine them. In that quiet moment, I reflected on everything we had endured, the intrusion, the subtle battles, the manipulations, and the confrontations. And I understood that the power of endurance, of love, and of shared history cannot be replaced, manipulated, or undermined. It is the invisible force that binds hearts, anchors souls, and withstands the storms of ambition, deception, and fleeting charm. And as I watched her walk away, I knew she finally realized what she had tried to challenge, the enduring bond between a mother and her family, unshakable, unyielding, and stronger than she could ever imagine. The morning light crept softly across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. I watched from the window, the first rays spilling warmth across the quiet streets, the trees swaying gently in the early breeze. The world seemed reborn, fresh, unburdened, and I felt, for the first time in months, the weight of tension lifting from my shoulders. Inside, the house carried the calm of ordinary life, yet rich with meaning. Laughter drifted from the kitchen, where my son and grandchildren moved in easy rhythm, preparing breakfast with a sense of shared purpose. Their movements were unhurried, deliberate, full of the intimacy and trust that only comes from enduring trials together. Every glance, every gesture, every quiet word carried the unspoken truth that we had emerged stronger, more united, and more resilient than ever. I stepped away from the window and moved into the living room, where the soft morning light pooled across the carpet. The space felt alive, not with chaos, but with harmony. The subtle echoes of fear and tension that had haunted these walls in the past months had dissipated, leaving behind a profound sense of stability. Our home was no longer a battleground of manipulation and silent threats. It was a sanctuary, a testament to love's endurance, and the quiet power of vigilance guided by care and devotion. My son entered the room, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea, his eyes meeting mine with a warmth that spoke of understanding, respect, and shared triumph. "Good morning, Mom," he said softly, placing 1 cup in my hands. "It feels peaceful." I smiled, inhaling the scent of the tea, letting the warmth seep into my chest. "It does," I replied, my voice calm yet tinged with the deep emotion of relief and quiet victory. "And it's a peace we've earned, together." The children bounded into the room, voices mingling in playful chatter, the innocence of youth painting the air with color and sound. They carried the joy of mornings unmarred by tension, the laughter of souls unburdened by subtle conflicts, and the confidence of knowing their family bond was unshakable. They had been silent observers, little guardians, and their quiet vigilance had contributed to the safety and integrity of our home. Their presence reminded me of the enduring power of love, the kind that transcends challenge and remains steady in the face of manipulation. I watched them, my heart swelling with pride, gratitude, and an almost tangible sense of wonder. Every small victory, every subtle strategy I had employed, every moment of resilience had led to this, a morning bathed in light, not just outside, but within our home, within our hearts. As we settled around the breakfast table, I allowed myself to reflect on the journey we had endured. The daughter-in-law, clever and ambitious, had sought to infiltrate and reshape our family, underestimating the depth of our connections, the strength of our vigilance, and the enduring power of love. She had been clever, yes, but cleverness alone cannot supplant decades of trust, sacrifice, and shared history. Our bonds, fortified through trials and nurtured with unwavering devotion, had proven unassailable. I shared a quiet glance with my son, and we exchanged a silent acknowledgement of the battles fought and won. It was a recognition of the subtle victories, the psychological strategies, the vigilance maintained not for pride, but for the protection of the family's emotional heart. And it was a recognition that love, loyalty, and truth endure, even when challenged by cunning and ambition. After breakfast, I stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The world had awoken fully now, birds singing, the leaves glistening with dew, and the sun climbing higher, spilling light across rooftops and gardens. It was cinematic in its beauty, as if nature itself were celebrating our quiet victory, the restoration of balance, and the triumph of enduring bonds. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs, and felt a profound sense of empowerment settle over me. This was not just a victory over manipulation. It was a victory of persistence, of love unshaken, of the invisible strength that binds family together. I felt my heart pulse with a quiet rhythm of confidence and hope, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them as a unified force. My son joined me on the porch, and together we watched the sun rise fully, casting long shadows and bathing the world in brilliance. "It feels like a new beginning," he said softly. "Yes," I replied, voice steady, resonant with the depth of what we had endured. A new dawn, not just in the world outside, but in our hearts. This is the result of resilience, love, and the strength of family. No one can take that from us. The children ran past us, their laughter echoing, their energy uncontained, a living symbol of hope, continuity, and the enduring bonds we had fought to protect. I realized then that the battles we had faced, the subtle manipulations, the tests of patience, the quiet psychological strategies, had only strengthened us. They had taught lessons not just of vigilance, but of love, endurance, and the irreplaceable value of shared history. I allowed myself a smile, the first one unshadowed by tension in months. The daughter-in-law had tried to disrupt, to manipulate, to replace. But she had underestimated what truly matters: the enduring connection between a mother and her family, the invisible strength that thrives in shared experiences, and the quiet, powerful force of love grounded in truth. The morning continued, and as we moved through the day, laughter and conversation filling every room, I felt a profound sense of closure. Not a closure born of conquest or revenge, but one born of understanding, endurance, and emotional truth. We had emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more united. And in that quiet certainty, I understood the moral that had threaded through every challenge, every confrontation, and every subtle maneuver. Love, loyalty, and truth endure. They are unshakable, unyielding, and more powerful than any charm, manipulation, or fleeting ambition. The bonds nurtured over decades cannot be rewritten by cunning or ambition. They can only be strengthened by vigilance, patience, and unwavering care. As the sun rose higher, spilling warmth into every corner of our home, I felt a deep emotional resonance settle over me. This was the promise of the future: a family united, a home filled with laughter and love, and a profound sense of hope that no challenge could diminish. We had faced manipulation, deceit, and subtle threats, and we had prevailed, not through force or confrontation alone, but through resilience, awareness, and the enduring power of our emotional bonds. I took one final deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, and I whispered softly to myself, "This is our dawn. Our love, our loyalty, our truth. They endure. And in that endurance, we are unstoppable." The children ran past again, their voices bright and uncontained, my son at my side sharing a smile that spoke volumes. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what came next, the family we had nurtured, protected, and defended would continue to thrive. Love, loyalty, and truth endure beyond manipulation and ambition. The bonds forged through care, sacrifice, and shared history are unshakable. In unity and vigilance, family becomes an unbreakable force, a new dawn rising over every challenge.